Do I miss Dubai? That's a very good question to ask. I don't miss Dubai. Honestly, I really don't. Because you can enter Canada up until the last day on your PR card and they can't stop you. I mean, and that submission that my lawyer made was 123 pages. So a lot of work went into preparing that case before our hearing with the Immigration and Refugee Board. So the Permanent Resident Travel Document, PRTD, basically allows Canadian permanent residents who are overseas, if they have lost their permanent resident card or it's expired when they're overseas, it allows them passage back to Canada. When you're a permanent resident of Canada, you are not allowed to avail these facilities of, visa-free travel to Canada. So while yes, I could have entered Canada, I really can't because I'd be breaking the law.
Hey guys, welcome to another podcast episode. Now, this podcast is very much relevant for those people who have had their PR for Canada expired and are looking for ways how they can go about entering Canada again and becoming a resident eventually. I know many people who have applied for Canadian PR, but they never eventually decide to move to Canada just because they have comfortable jobs, they have comfortable situations, but come 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years down the lane, you are in a situation where you don't have that comfort anymore and you want to move to Canada now, but your PR has been expired. How do you go about re-entering Canada and establishing yourself in Canada, getting a PR renewed, and eventually becoming a citizen? I have a case in point where I call in a guest who had a similar situation and they were able to get through into Canada again. So in case you are interested in knowing how this friend of mine or how this guest that I've invited was eventually able to get back into Canada, renew their PR, and become a Canadian citizen, then this podcast is for you. Now with that, one important call out. In case you find any value from this video, I have to ask for you. One, press the like button because this means a lot for me. It will help me improve the quality and the quantity of the content that I post on this channel. And second, subscribe to the channel so you get notified as soon as I put a new content on this channel where I talk about how you can go about achieving success in your career and in your personal finances and money matters as well. In case these topics are of interest to you, make sure you like this video and plus also subscribe to the channel. Now, without further wait, let's get rolling into the podcast. So thank you, Imad, for joining. And what I will do is, Imad, I will pass on to you to first introduce yourself. And then I have a bunch of questions that I will be asking you pertaining to your case and all. And we will go and dive deeper into all of that. So Imad, over to you. Nice. That's cool. So can you explain more? What do you mean when you say half Arab and half Pakistani? That's a combination very rare to see, at least for me. It's a not a very common combination to know of. So can you speak more about that?
Certainly. Well, my dad was born and brought up in Yemen, in the city of Aden, and then he moved to Pakistan for his higher education. That's where he and my mother got married. So my mom is Pakistani; she's from Punjab. So I mean, that's ethnically, I'm half Arab, half Pakistani. My dad's side of the family is completely Arab, in every sense of the word, and then my mom's side of the family is completely Pakistani.
Got it. So where were you born, you said?
I was born in Pakistan, in Karachi.
And that's what makes you Pakistani. But your father had an
Yes.
Arab origin, which is Yemeni origin, you said. So he is
That's
from
right.
Yemen then. Okay. So what next? Where did you move next after Pakistan?
Well, like I said, I mean, my sister and I were born in Pakistan, and then my father, moved to Dubai uh, to work over there. My uncle used to work over there, then obviously helped him get a job. And so my father moved there, I think, in what, 1977, if I'm not mistaken. And we started living there. That's where I've had my formal education, till I finished high school, and then I moved to the United States for higher education.
Got it. So Nice to know. You said you moved to United States. You also mentioned have a UK or British citizenship. So how did you go about having that citizenship? Given you said Pakistan, Arab, and where's this third triangle coming from?
Yeah, it's a very complicated web in our family, to explain all of this. So when my father was born, Yemen and Aden was basically a British colony. So he became a British citizen as a result of it. When I was born in Pakistan, the law and the rules for citizenship at the time, from what I understand, was that you had to take your father's nationality. As a result, I became a British citizen. When I was born, I could not take my mother's nationality.
Okay, nice. So that brings me to ask you a question, which is, why did you not choose to move to UK, given you have the nationality, and eventually move to Canada? Rather, before I even ask that question, let me ask another question, which is, why did you want to why did you decide to leave Dubai altogether? Given you lived there, you had your schooling there, you lived there for a very long time. Why did you decide that you want to leave Dubai? And then we will talk about where you eventually moved and why. But why the choice of leaving Dubai?
I'll break it up into two steps. I think the first step would be, at the time when I finished high school, they didn't have, universities like they do now. So the only option for me was to relocate overseas for my studies. And between the United Kingdom and the United States, the US is what I chose, to pursue my higher education. Finished that, started working over there, got my H-1B. Everything was great. But after 9/11, things changed in the United States. And eventually, I had to make a decision, whether I stay in the United States or pursue my career elsewhere. I was already a British citizen. So I decided to relocate back to the Middle East, and that's where I pursued my career in capital markets. However, I when I left, I mean, obviously I was married, I had a daughter. My wife and I had first thought of, relocating to Canada back in 2003, and eventually, we knew that that's where we wanted to go, but it just took a little bit of time to eventually, get there.
But then this brings me, or rather, before I even go there. So still, I am not too clear as to if you had a good job in Dubai, you're working there.
Mhm.
Why did you decide that you have to move out of Dubai? So why not just stay there longer and just work there for as long as you could?
Certainly, that's a very valid question. So I'm a British citizen. My wife and two children are Pakistani, and my other daughter is an American. So we have a United Nations of passports in our family, and some days we're allies and some days we're not. So the time came for us to relocate to Canada based on two factors. One of them was obviously that my daughters were now at that age where they were going to pursue higher education. There was what kept me in Dubai was not only a good job, was having extended family, my parents and my sisters over there. Eventually, everybody left. That was a second reason. And the third reason was that even though I had become a permanent resident of Canada, my PR had expired. I had gone through a rather extensive process of getting permission to come back to Canada. And that time frame was basically lapsing, and I had pretty much no choice but to move or forget about my chances of coming back to Canada.
But did you ever think of staying in Dubai longer and forever and just retiring in Dubai in some way or the other?
That is a thought. My father, like I mentioned, he moved to Dubai in 1977. He spent almost 40 years in Dubai, and I have seen Dubai as a very transitory place. I've seen many people come and go over the course of my lifetime, having grown up there. So I know that it's not, something that's permanent. It's very difficult to retire over there unless you have a lot of money. So that was definitely never the choice. I knew that eventually I wanted to be closer to my family who had relocated to Canada. So this was the place to come.
Yeah, as in this was the challenge for us as well, which is I would say for us it was threefold. One is, where do I educate my kids eventually, because I want to be closer to my kids, right? So, and it was clear it
Mhm.
would not be Middle East, and I think that was the choice you also kind of made, which is either you stay away from your kids or you decide to stay with them. And if you have to stay with them, then you bring, or by with them, it doesn't mean like you living exactly in the same house. Eventually, it could be just being in the same place or same continent or same country, city, and all together. Second is Dubai permanent? While you're making good money, it is very hard. But I always say that the decision of moving from Dubai becomes sweeter and sweeter with each passing day. It is a difficult decision and it is a bad decision the day you make it. But each passing day, it becomes a better decision. And by the time you are in your retirement age, it is one of the best decisions. You look back and you go like, this was one of the best decisions. So it's kind of if you can delay gratification, then I think you're good with this piece. And third piece is having kids to grow in such a luxury environment was something I was not comfortable with. So given I had choice, I was like, it would be like I was raised in an environment. Probably it was different for you as well because you were raised in a, I would consider Dubai as a first world country. Uh, it wasn't the case with me. So I was raised in more of a harsher conditions in Pakistan. But the amount of luxury, especially the luxury that started to be seen now recently, maybe when you were growing, it was not as luxurious, as rich as it is now. So with kids growing in such a bubble, I would always fear that it is you're raising your kids in such a scenario or such a situation which is very artificial for them. So that was another piece for me to say, okay, I want to move abroad. But now let me ask you another question, which is why not UK? If you have a UK citizenship, why would you even apply for Canada PR? I know you said you have family in Canada, but other than that, was anything else a consideration for you to say not UK and Canada only?
That's a very good question. So UK is, given what I used to do, which is capital markets. I mean, UK is ultimately the hub, and that's where you want to be. Visited UK with my wife. She didn't particularly like it. So that's maybe one of the reasons. But I think the overarching reason would be that UK nationality law is quite complicated. Uh, Relocating my family to Canada was easier than it would have been to relocate them to the United Kingdom because would have required me to resign from Dubai, move to England, find a job, meet the income requirements for at least 6 months, and then start the process of bringing them to the United Kingdom. And all this time, they would have been back in Pakistan. School would have gotten interrupted. A lot of things, there's a lot of disruption there. So, from that perspective, it was just better for us to move to Canada.
Okay, makes sense. But then why did you let your PR expire? You said you applied for PR. So can you talk more about when you applied for PR? What was that program? Probably it was an old program, not Express Entry. And if you remember anything from that program, how did you manage to get your PR? How easy was it? And second, why did you let your PR expire?
So I started applying for my PR back in 2008. I had taken up a new assignment in my bank, which would have qualified me with the relevant experience to apply for that. Otherwise, I mean, capital markets professionals don't usually qualify. It was finance and accounting. I had gotten into that field just for a brief amount of time so I could qualify for Canada. So I applied in 2008. In those days, it took multiple years to, you know, get your PR. I think it took me about 4 years back and forth between the Canadian government and embassies, just to get my PR. Landed in 2012, spent 23 days in Canada, and then left. The idea was to come to Canada in 2014, uh, with enough time, to meet our residency requirements. What happened was in 2014, my wife was pregnant with our third daughter. Uh, there were certain medical reasons, obviously, that prevented us from immediately coming to Canada. And then there were legal complications afterwards, after my daughter was born, uh, which prevented us, which is basically call it a diplomatic fight between two countries as to who gets citizenship for this child.
So talk more about this diplomatic challenge that you had. What was it about, and with regards to your child not getting PR? I would assume if you have the PR already, your child is born, you just send them a letter saying, "I have an extra member in the family now, which is just born," and they just assign them a PR. It seems it is not that easy. So talk more about why it wasn't that easy.
In order to answer that question, let me just go back just slightly about my citizenship. Since I inherited my citizenship from my father, I could not pass it on to my children. That is one issue. So when my daughter was born in Dubai in November 2014, I went to the Pakistan embassy over there, and I said, well, I'd like to apply for um, a passport, and they said, no, you can't because you're British. Go and get a British passport. And I tried to explain to them that I can't because nationality law in the United Kingdom does not allow me to pass on my citizenship, and they weren't willing to buy it, to be very honest. And I wrote to the British embassy. They quite clearly said, you can't do this. And so it was a lot of back and forth, constantly going to, and if you know anything about, going to Pakistan embassies, it is a hassle at times. Eventually, I managed to get a meeting with somebody higher up in the embassy, and what they said was, well, the best solution we can tell you is why don't you become a Pakistani yourself? Because I've only had a British passport my entire life. So I actually had to go and to the another office within the embassy and apply for a Pakistan ID card and everything. That took some time. Once that came in, then I could formally say that okay, I want to, give my citizenship to my daughter, and that's how she eventually got legalized in terms of having a citizenship.
So one thing I'm confused about is you said you were able to get UK citizenship because of your father. How could
Mhm.
that you could not pass on the citizenship to your kids given you have the citizenship just like your father had?
So in terms of myself and my sisters getting that citizenship, I mean obviously that was a legal technicality that Pakistan had this law where children had to inherit their father's nationality. So the British government allowed that transition for one future generation to occur. Now for my children to become British citizens, they would have had to be born in the United Kingdom and they can automatically become citizens because I was a citizen as well. But obviously, they were born overseas, one in America, one in Pakistan, one in UAE. So it's like I kind of created a whole mess for myself there.
Got it. Makes sense. And this is, I assume, what made or got you to get your move to Canada being delayed. And because of this delay, your PR got expired. So now let's come to the meat, which is your PR is expired now. How do you go about, and your one of your child doesn't have a PR altogether. The others have, but they're expired. How do you go about getting into Canada, being a permanent resident, and becoming a citizen eventually?
Sure. Before I set the stage for that, let me just give you a little bit of background context. So, I mean, after my daughter got her citizenship of Pakistan, I started engaging with the embassy in Abu Dhabi and saying, "Well, listen, I have a daughter. How do I move her to Canada? I still want to move." And they weren't particularly helpful. I wrote to them; they weren't responsive or anything, and they didn't have much information on their website. The next thing I did was I started to engage with an attorney in Ontario, and I asked them, listen, these are my circumstances. Well, what do I do? And I did that with three different attorneys. One of them did not want to take my case. The other two gave me incredibly untenable, suggestions. For example, they said, "Why don't you live in Dubai? You must be making good money. Why don't you spend $100,000 and buy a Caribbean passport for your daughter? She can travel to Canada visa free." Well, I said, when if I had $100,000, just lying around, you think I would spend it on that? Um, the second suggestion was, okay, why don't you send your wife and two daughters who have PR to Canada and keep your daughter in Dubai with you and take care of her, and then they can sponsor her. Again, very difficult, untenable circumstances. And the last one was just even more extraordinary, was that why don't you all come to Canada and leave your daughter behind with the grandparents, and she's an infant at this point in time. And all of these suggestions and splitting the family were not options for me. My PR was supposed to expire. I landed in 2012, so my PR was going to expire in 2017. And up until a few months before my PR card expired, I was still engaged with lawyers trying to find some way to bring my family to Canada. But eventually, I knew that this was not a solution that I wanted to take up. and I let my PR cards expire. And I said, we'll see what it is. Because once your PR cards expire, you cannot come into Canada, but you still maintain your residency status. So basically, I said, all right, I'm going to step back and we're going to regroup later on.
Nice. So then what happened next? Then how did you go about with the process? Because now your PR has expired and you're still in the void, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do
Yes.
you manage that?
So the PR has expired, we're still in Dubai. 2018 rolls around, and there's a bunch of challenges at work. In a corporate environment, there's a lot of challenges, and so there's a lot of downsizing going on. And my name was possibly on a chopping block, and I was quite worried about things at that point in time. That's where I started talking to a cousin of mine who lives in Canada, and I was just telling him what I'm going through, and he happened to redirect me to a lawyer here in Calgary. He said, "Why don't you talk to this guy? I think he might be able to help you." So I connected with him and found out that he is a, South Asian Pakistani origin, British trained lawyer who works in Calgary. It was the best of all worlds for me. So he understood Pakistani culture, he understood British nationality law, and obviously he understood Canadian law. And I engaged with him and I asked him, well, these are my circumstances. What do I do? How do I come to Canada? And so we embarked on this process where we would try to get a permanent residence travel document for myself and my family on humanitarian and compassionate grounds.
Nice. And okay, this brings me to the humanitarian and compassionate consideration grounds, which I talked initially as an intro to the video. So what is this visa, or what is this travel document, and how do I get it, or anyone else, like not for me but for people who are trying to move to Canada? What would make them get it? What are the circumstances in which you can get it overall, and how did you play it in your favor to eventually land your citizenship in Canada?
So the permanent resident travel document, PRTD, basically allows Canadian permanent residents who are overseas, if they have lost their permanent resident card or it's expired when they're overseas, it allows them passage back to Canada. It's a very simple application that you fill out and you give to your local embassy, and then they process it. One of the key things they are looking for in such an application when you make it is, well, what caused you to be outside Canada? What are the circumstances in which your PR card is expired or you've lost it? And more importantly, whether you have fulfilled your residency obligation, which is 730 days out of 1095 days, if I'm not 730 days in 5 years. Sorry, that's what it is. So they're looking to that. Have you met those requirements, or are you likely to meet those requirements? So that is how you get a permanent resident travel document. Within the context of this application, such as in my case, where I had only spent 23 days in Canada, there is a case to be made for humanitarian and compassionate grounds, that there are extraordinary circumstances that I was not able to overcome. And I would like consideration that, listen, I would like to come back to Canada because of XYZ reasons.
So, a curiosity question, which is, you said once your PR is expired, you're still a Canadian resident, but you can't enter Canada because you don't have a
Mhm.
document to enter Canada. Are there any other ways to enter Canada? And once you enter Canada, can you just stay there for the 3 years that you have to stay there and eventually reignite the process of getting your PR renewed and then eventually become a citizen? Were there any other routes which were possible for you to, or it's the challenge is you just can't enter Canada, and because you can't enter Canada, hence you have to find other ways, which you did?
I think there are routes to enter Canada, but they might not entirely be legal. Let me explain. So I'm a British citizen. I have visa-free entry into Canada, into the United States. So I could have, in theory, entered Canada literally by getting on a plane and coming to Toronto on my British passport, or coming to the United States and literally driving across the border and coming into Canada and continuing my residency. However, when you are a permanent resident of Canada, you are not allowed to avail these facilities of visa-free travel to Canada. So while yes, I could have entered Canada, I really can't because I'd be breaking the law.
So, so this is good. But was this one of the considerations which you got as a legal advice, or a possibility with high risk, or no, this was like, no, this will not work at all because it's illegal, and even if you come to Canada via US or through using your UK passport, then your application, like you did on humanitarian grounds, will not stand a chance at all. So you may be able to enter Canada, but then you're just in Canada at a no status just because it's illegal to apply. And the reason I ask this question is because I know a lot of people, and even I at some point in time was trying to consider if there is a way for me to get Canadian passport while living in Dubai on Dubai income, right? Best of all worlds, no tax, high income, and having an international passport. And I was thinking, what if there is a way I can get the PR, move out of Canada, live in Dubai for 5, 10, 15 years, and then enter Canada through the US border? Because what I've understood is that if you have an expired PR, you can still enter Canada through US border, because in US at US border you really don't need to, like, it has to be through the border, not by taking a flight. And if you move through the border, then you can enter Canada. And once I've entered Canada, I was in resident, it was just expired status, and then I lived there for another 2 years, apply for renewing my card, and then apply for citizenship and all. So help me understand, what are the complications and how severe are those legal complications, and that's why you didn't take that route.
Well, I think there are certainly, I mean, if you are going to apply for, let's say, in my case, an electronic travel authorization to come to Canada, you're basically lying that you don't have any status in Canada. So the second you do that, you are, you've perjured yourself, and then you are subject to the relevant consequences for that. I certainly did not want to do that. So that is certainly one consideration. There's another consideration for us was that yes, you can. You're absolutely right. You can actually come to a land border as with expired PR cards, and you can enter. That would have required me to bring myself or my family members to the United States. Sure, four of us could have easily walked into Canada. What about the fifth one who doesn't have any status in Canada? So these are the things, and I just did not want to risk those things where we're sitting in the middle of nowhere, not knowing whether we're going forward or not. If I was going to come to Canada, I was going to do it the right way, or I was just going to abandon it.
I completely agree with you. While I've had temptations of finding, which we refer to as jugaad in our Desi
Yeah.
language, I've always had those temptations. But what has kept me away is, even if I get, even if I cheat the system and I get this citizenship, what if 5 years down the lane, someone just complains, or they do a random check, and here comes my luck, which has proven to be very not so lucky, like I think it has been more hard work for me than the luck piece. And what if it's my application? Now I have a house here, I have family here, a job here, and they send me a letter saying you lied, you cheated, and your citizenship is over. Go wherever you want to go, but you can't live in Canada. Now I'm, let's say, 50, 55 years old. I've lived here for so many years. Yes, I cheated, but now it's my life, right? So then I'm done. So that has, and then it would be not peaceful sleep for those so many years that I'm there, because every day I'm thinking, what if there is a random check? What if there is someone who just complains because I may have spoken about it, or my wife or my kids may have spoken about it, that I figured a shortcut to come into Canada and got my citizenship and all. So yeah, I completely hear you on that. I would, despite the temptation, I would not take that risk. um Now let's get into the case itself. So was the case complicated? How long did it take? What was the process like? How much was the fee involved? And what were the peaks and troughs of the case itself?
Sure. Sorry, excuse me. So we started talking to our lawyer. We explained our situation. They did a complete interview for myself and my wife, understood our circumstances. And the first step was to formally apply to the Canadian Embassy in Abu Dhabi that we are permanent residents of Canada. We would like to return to Canada. And we have humanitarian and compassionate grounds. The likelihood of that succeeding was nil. They would just simply look at that, hey, this guy's been in Canada for 23 days in the last 5 years. There's no way we're going to let him in. And that's exactly what happened. They immediately, after, I don't know, 5, 6 months, they sent us a letter saying, we're denying your application to come to Canada. We'll begin procedures to basically revoke your permanent residency status. However, there is the option of appealing the decision of a visa officer. And we knew that we would have to go down this route. And that's when we began. Again, we said that yes, we would like to appeal and we would like to have a formal hearing where our case is heard and somebody makes a decision as to what those circumstances were which prevented us from coming into Canada. So we began that process. Once we filed the appeal, there is a process of getting documentation from the Canadian embassy as to what their basis for their decision was. We were able to see their notes, the visa officer's notes, and everything. And at the same time, we did a lot of work on, well, what are the circumstances that prevented us? My daughter's case with regards to her citizenship, the legal advice that we had, what is the situation in Pakistan, my kids' relationship with Canada or family in Canada, for example. So the entire process, start to finish till the day of our hearing, took almost 20 months.
Wow. And did you know, or do you know from the notes of the visa officer what made them reject it in the first place? What was the argument that they made? Which you said you were expecting that rejection to come, so you were already prepared, which is a good thing. But still, what were those arguments that were made by them, and how did you challenge those arguments then?
Their arguments were first and foremost, well, this family has not met the residency requirement. 23 days and 5 years, for God's sakes. I mean, so anybody would reject that. But when it comes to the other considerations, the humanitarian considerations that we presented, we said, well, we had circumstances like the birth of our daughter and the complications for her citizenship. That's one issue. The other is we don't want to split our family. We don't want, my children to reside in Pakistan. They barely speak Urdu. They can't read the language. They stick out like a sore thumb, in Pakistan. Hell, I do, having lived overseas my entire life. Um, and so those were the circumstances that we said, you need to consider this and let us move together as a family. Their counterpoint was that you've not met the residency requirement. You have deliberately not chosen to teach your children Urdu or the Pakistani culture because you intend to move to Canada eventually. You're enjoying a tax free life in UAE. And that's also another reason you don't want to move to Canada. And it's one of the reasons you have not maintained roots with Pakistan. So, and with regards to your daughter and everything, well, you had the option of, flying to Canada and your wife could have given birth over there, and why didn't you do that? So that was their rationale.
These are fair rationales, by the way, and these are very fair points. So, what was the counter argument that you placed in front? So, what happened next when you appealed? It went where, and then what were your counter arguments, your counterpoints, and how did you eventually succeed?
So over the course of many months, what we did was we wrote statements. My wife and I wrote individual statements regarding our circumstances. We explained in great detail what happened. We gathered information about British nationality law, why I could not pass on my citizenship, and why it's so difficult to meet that burden of being able to move to the United Kingdom. We also established, by this time, a lot of my family, my parents had moved to Canada, my sisters, we had at least 18 to 20 family members, immediate family members who resided in Canada. So we established ties to Canada with the presence of these people. We also passed on, for example, our legal advice to our attorney that this is the legal advice that we was given in forms of email and everything else. Then we, you know, had to also say, well, our kids are in school. We had to submit their report cards, my income statements, my ties to my family in Pakistan. Well, how much family do we have in Pakistan? How much family do we have in England? All of these things. I mean, and that submission that my lawyer made was 123 pages. So a lot of work went into preparing that case before our hearing with the Immigration and Refugee Board.
Now, one important call out in case you want to use professional services for you to get a permanent residency in Canada or have a complicated case like we have for Imad, then I have an immigration lawyer or a consultant that I highly recommend. I've used that consultant myself as well, and I've recommended that consultant to many of my friends and who have been significantly or majorly happy with this individual's service. In case you're interested in reaching out to them, I will leave their contact in the description of this video. Reach out to them and seek any kind of immigration help or services that you need. I'm sure you will be extremely satisfied. Now let's get rolling back into our podcast. So, Imad, one more thing that you talked to me about was you went through a complete hearing process as well. And by the way, at that time, you were not present in Canada. Of course, you were in Dubai and it was done on the phone. So, would love to know more about that piece as well as to how did that go and what was the process like in your experience.
So once we had made our submissions, to the Canadian government and everything, we got a date as to when our hearing was going to be. During this hearing, it would be my lawyer in Canada, the Minister's Council, who would obviously be trying to oppose allowing us coming into Canada, and my wife and I were sitting in our living room in Dubai on a speakerphone. It was the middle of the night. It was very formal. It was almost like being exactly like being in a court. I mean, we were sworn in and we were told that, we cannot talk to each other while each of us is testifying. And they went through an extensive questioning of my wife first, in which they asked us, well, how did you guys meet? When did you get married? Um, Tell us about your family life, your kids. Well, what are the circumstances of your pregnancy? Um, all of those questions. They really, it was quite a lot of questions. I don't remember all of them, but it was quite a lot. And then after my wife had finished testifying, which was more about her and her relationship with children, her pregnancy, things like that. Then they came to me, and that was a bit more technical. And they started asking me questions about my career, how much money I was making, what do I do in Dubai, why did I seek to come to Canada, what kind of advice I had been given by the lawyers. And at one point, the Minister's Council actually said that I don't really believe it. I mean, you could have easily gone to the Canadian embassy and just asked them to give your daughter a PR, and they would have given it to you. I was like, well, why don't you open a computer and go to the Canadian embassy's website right now in Abu Dhabi and show me one place where it says that I have this option. There is nothing on that website that gives me this option. And I was getting a bit frustrated. It was the middle of the night as well. At one point, I said, listen, I'm here because I have shown a commitment to come to Canada. I am coming with my entire family, or I'm not coming. You can keep the permanent residency. I don't recommend that people do this. But I mean, I was at that point, in the middle of the night where I said that. Well, anyway, after our questioning was completed, the judge, if that's the right term, basically asked the lawyers, for any closing arguments or anything like that. They didn't. My lawyer said, we have a submission, as you have seen in front of you. The judge, very surprisingly, immediately said, you know what? There are two elements in front of us. One, do these people meet the residency requirements? Or have they met the residency requirements? The answer is clearly no. Why should they be allowed in Canada? Should be allowed in Canada because it is in the best interest of their children. And that was the reason, more than anything else, they felt that my children would be better served in Canada. They would flourish in Canada, not only academically, but also with extended family. And that was the argument that, prevailed at the end of the day. And I'll be very honest, after, we finished the conversation, my lawyer called me and he said, I was not expecting that. The probability of you actually having met this burden and being allowed back in Canada was so slim that I am so surprised that, it worked out, because I had a stronger case yesterday and I didn't get through on that one. So, I mean, the odds are very much stacked against you if you go down the humanitarian ground. So it has to be very compelling.
Got it. Makes sense. This is amazing. And again, you going through this experience must be very challenging as well. One question I have is how much did all of this cost you, having the lawyer and all other legal fees, non legal fees for this entire process, in case you remember the number?
Certainly. I mean, the government of Canada fees, I mean, constantly changing. So I'm just going to avoid commenting on that. But I mean, the entire process cost me, I think, just over $12,000.
And this was back in, you said 2007,
2018 is when I
2018.
started, and I got my final decision in 2020, in February 2020. And then, of course, with COVID and everything got delayed, and we had to push back our arrival to Canada.
Got it. Okay, that's nice, and uh, that's great to know as to you eventually finding help and help with regards to you settling here and moving here. Now let's move on to the question which I had after you've settled here is how do you find it in Canada? What are the things you like here? What are the things you still miss about Middle East? One would be tax-free income, of course, but other than that, how's your life here, and how has your life evolved? What do you miss? What do you like here?
Great question. I think 2 years in, I would say that I'm very happy in Canada. If you asked me in the first 6 months, I would tell you I was absolutely miserable. And I think that's the case with a lot of people, whether you move from Dubai or any other country. I think in the first 6 months, there was a lot of transition that occurred, a lot of different things to learn, set up. So very frustrating. But 2 years later, I think my career is on track. I'm very happy where I am. I see my daughters flourish at university and school. I have family nearby, my parents, my sisters, my wife's extended family. So we can still maintain those traditions and those key moments, in life, which make it very meaningful. So do I miss the tax-free income? Absolutely. Do I miss Dubai? That's a very good question to ask. I don't miss Dubai. Honestly, I really don't. Because Dubai was all about the people and the work and the kind of my family, my friends, and everything. I miss them, but I don't miss the glitz, the glam, or any of those things, to be honest. I'm very happy over here.
I A few reflections on a few things you said. One is you said 6 months, initial 6 months you were miserable. I completely agree. Rather, I think 6 months is still short of a time. One should keep 1 year of misery. And probably again, this is true. I would say it's more true when you're moving from Dubai, but you're right. It may not be just a move from Dubai. It's just when you're moving to a new place, and especially when it's a personal move and not a company driven move, you don't get a lot of support and help. You have to do everything from scratch from yourself, and it takes a toll on yourself, your family, the change and all. This is just a product of change. You'll see all that pain. So I completely agree that people should, like I say, usually you should have 1 year of your savings there with you just to protect and all, but it's more than that. It's not just 1 year of your saving. You should also have 1 year of strong grit, because things will get tough and you should be prepared for things getting tough, not just financially, but mentally as well.
Mhm.
So I completely agree to that point. And second point that you made about the missing Dubai, I completely agree as well. My time in Dubai was the best. It was very good.
Mhm.
I loved it. Do I miss it? I miss it as well. But do I want to do it again? No. I like where I am now. I like the. It's like it was a good life. I enjoyed it. I lived it. But it was a phase of my life that happened at the right time, at the right place, and that phase is gone now. I'm in a very different phase,
Mhm.
which makes me more happy with this phase being in North America, in Canada, and US, versus saying, okay, eventually I'll go back. I know a lot of people who say this, they will go back and all, but probably I found that they say this in the first year, and then it kind of starts to mellow down, and by the time they're here for 3 years, it's kind of done and dusted that they live here and they'll just establish their life here. And I think this is also one of the reasons they've kept the 3 year rule, right? So
Mhm.
once you've lived any place for 3 years, you start calling it home. Your kids are there, going to school. You've established life, established relationships, and then you are almost there, and it becomes your life. So yeah, I just wanted to reflect on those 2 points you made. Um, Sorry, you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say. My wife and I have been together for 25 years, and I think in 25 years we've moved countries almost 5 times. So I don't think that it's in her to make another move to the Middle East. Do I want to move to the Middle East? I would say that I would probably move more for an intellectual challenge, with regards to work. If the right opportunity came along, then I might consider it. But sitting here right now where we are, I don't see myself, like I said, moving just yet.
Yeah, I agree. And that's another piece as well, which is I think you made a good point, and maybe we're slightly digressing, but I like this point, which is it is much easier for you to move when you're young, and you should make a
Mhm.
lot of moves. Um, I was reading somewhere, and I really like that piece that if you want to make more money and have a better career, you need to move to a bigger city. And for me, it was like I was born in Quetta, I moved to Karachi, Karachi to Dubai, Dubai to Toronto, Toronto to now Boston, New York. This is where I am.
Hmm.
And that's what I've tried to do, which is every time I've made a move closer to a bigger city, my career has flourished. I was able to make more money. But you can only do it so much. So I strongly urge people, don't be hooked up to your city, to your passport, to your nationality. The
Hmm.
world is your oyster. Just explore as much as you can, especially when you're young, because it
Absolutely.
will become more difficult, as you said, once you've grown up, and once you've grown older, because not just because of your kids, but also the the power of managing that grid of changing
Hmm.
becomes very difficult. So now, even when I have to
Absolutely.
move my house from one neighborhood to the other, it's a lot of toll versus it used to be very easy. Just pack your bags and move houses and change places.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Cool, thank you. One last question I have, which is, and I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I'll still try my luck. And I'll go back to the challenge of PR getting expired. If it wasn't for your daughter, and if she had a PR as well, an expired PR, do you think it's still easier to come through the US border, enter Canada, and be able to then live here for 2, 3 years and then get your passport, PR renewed, and eventually live here for 3 years and then get your citizenship? I don't know if you know the answer. And the reason I'm asking you is because you've gone through the process. Probably you had some similar discussions with the lawyer and may have some opinion or some thoughts on that.
During the initial phase, when I was talking, not to my, the lawyer who actually got me over the line to come into Canada, during the initial phase when I was consulting with other lawyers, they mentioned something similar to this. They said that, listen, you can enter Canada up until the last day on your PR card, and they can't stop you. If your PR card's valid, up until the last day, you can enter Canada, and no big deal. And even if you were coming down from the United States into Canada and you had these expired PR cards, you could still come into Canada. You could fulfill your 730-day requirement and then say, well, you know what? I'd like to apply for a new PR card, and they would have to give it to you. So there is that option, obviously.
Got it. Many thanks. Thank you. This was Imad, really helpful. A great conversation with you, and thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast and sharing your valuable inputs and your amazing story. One last question I have is, where can people reach out to you in case they have any question regarding to whatever you've shared and they want to connect with you? Is there a way they can reach out to you and connect with you?
The best way to reach me would be LinkedIn. I get a lot of questions from many different people, and I love answering them and trying to help wherever I can.
Cool. Thank you, Imad. Again, thanks for coming in and have a great day. And we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Feroz.